Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Jason Whitehead. I'm the CEO of Tritons, and you're here with the Jason's Take On Customer Success Leadership. We're really excited to be here, along with my co-host, Jason Noble in the UK. As we said, this is a new series, and we're really excited about it, and we're going to do a new topic around customer success pretty much every month or so, every 3, 4, 5 weeks. So we encourage you to come back often and continue to join us. Jason and I were talking the other day about why this series. And, I think the big issue here is that we're both very passionate about customer success. And we've both been in the area, in the field since it started. And we've seen a lot of the value that customer success brings to businesses. But we also see that a lot of challenges are emerging. And people are looking for ideas and best practices and creative thinking about how to move forward. So we want to really have a chance to share some of our insights from our experience, as well as the people that we've spoken to in the industry. And I think as well that the customer success community is so collaborative and so into share, and this is our way to help share our learnings and help get back to the community. And so we're really excited to have this series, and I'm really excited about it. So just a quick bit about my intro before we turn it over to Jason, my co-host. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm the CEO of Tritons. We are a customer success and software adoption consulting and training company based in the Washington, D.C. area. Been in business for over 12 years and work with a variety of small, medium, and large-sized companies, helping them really build out their customer success practices, and have been fortunate enough to work with some great professionals on the customer side and on the consulting side, and just really excited to be here. And my passion area, as most of you will probably know, is more around the software adoption side and really help people embrace technology as new ways of working so they can move forward with great personal success, professional success, and success for your organization. So that's just a little bit about me. Jason, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Good afternoon, everyone, or even good morning. Really excited to be here talking about all things customer success related. As you'll get to know, it's a big, big passion of mine, something I'm super excited about. And to be able to do this with someone else called Jason in a different country is a really, really exciting thing to do with a new series of webinars. So I'm Jason Noble. I've been around in the technology and customer success space now for a few years, but I started my working life out as a financial accountant a few years back. I moved into technology back in the days of on-premise licensed software, working in financial services, building customer service and support operations for a range of technology companies, both startups and enterprise level ones. And I then grew into the world of service delivery, account management, and program management, working in global roles for companies like Sony, Reed Elsevier, and Rackspace. My focus and theme throughout my career has always been about the customer, and the evolution into customer success as a more formal discipline really occurred really naturally for me. All of my roles having been customer focused, I think it gives you that breadth of experience, gives you a really nice insight into all the different touch points, the different challenges. I've spent time over recent years working with and advising companies going through their own business transformation or digital transformation programs and helping create and lead global customer success functions, be that different for different organizations. So build out from startup up to scale up, from UK based out to global organizations. So really be there from the beginning to seeing where they get to. And it's really an exciting time. I think one of the things that I've learned is that customer success is very different for every organization. It's very different depending on you as a business, your cultural philosophy, what you're trying to do, what your services are, but also your customers. And what Jason and I are going to try and do is share some themes and patterns that we've seen over the years through our experiences that can really help and really help you all with your own challenges there. As Jason said, we've got a lot of questions to cover. We've got some questions that were provided beforehand. And then Jason and I have also put together a number that we're going to work through. And I'll jump straight into the first question. So the first one I'm going to pose is, what are the current big challenges that we're seeing in customer success leadership? What do you think, Jason?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few out there, and the more I talk to other leaders, the more I become aware of just how severe these are. I think off the bat, there's a big issue that there's a lack of experience in the field. Customer success as a discipline is still so new that people are trying to figure out what works and what doesn't, and it's also maturing very rapidly. So finding people who have that leadership experience and leading customer teams, but also getting creative and helping customers be successful, there's not a lot of folks out there. So that's definitely a challenge. And I think related to that too, as the field, it's so new for both the customers themselves, but also the SaaS organization or anyone selling on a subscription basis that's setting up a customer success team, they don't necessarily know what to look for or how to develop good leaders, and they're trying to figure those pieces out. And I think also a lot of it, people are expecting tremendous expectations for industry-specific knowledge. So they want to hire a customer success leader that knows their industry backwards and forwards. And it's hard to find people that have both the industry knowledge as well as that customer success domain expertise that they're looking for. And I think also that a lot of the proven leaders, they like a good challenge, and they tend to move around pretty quickly. So they may be into an organization for a little while and get things set up and then decide to move out and try again and do something else in a new challenge. So I think all of that together, there's a lot of challenges around it. And there's also, hard to figure out what's the best and the right way to do customer success. So, that's sort of my take. If Jason, do you have other thoughts around that?
I think one of the key things that we're seeing is, and this is both the same US, UK, anywhere in Europe, in Asia Pacific, that there are a lot of organizations looking for CS leaders now. I think we're seeing organizations still thinking that you need that very industry specific experience, which can be very hard to get. So as Jason said, that the expectations right now are to get someone that's got the CS leadership experience, quite extensive, but also very, very industry specific. That is a real challenge. And I do think one of the problems that we're seeing as well is that businesses quite often, when they're going through different stages of funding, different stages of investment, where that initial and kind of long-term investment needs to go can often be a challenge. And those CS leaders that come in can then be put up into very difficult positions. So I think it's something that we're seeing get better and better, but I think those are really a nice summary of what the key challenges are. But for me, as I said, one of the biggest ones is around the kind of expectations for what you'll bring to the table. And it is difficult when right now quite often you go into business and it isn't very clear from the outside what their customer success strategy vision is. You've got to help build that. You've got to help educate your stakeholders.
That's so true. And I think that sort of leads to one of the things that we're also finding too is when you're looking across CS leadership, there's folks who are really aggressive and groundbreaking, and their organizations are looking for really new and disruptive things. And customer success in its own way is meant to be very disruptive and transformative of getting people to think and act differently and embrace their customer differently, which really begs the question, Jason, do you find that customer success leaders, are they being bold enough? Are they pushing the envelope as much as they should?
I don't think they are. I think there's a lot more all of us can do. I've been in organizations where you as a CS leader, I think you do have to push the boat. You have to be bold and try different things. You're trying to get the business quite often, trying to get your CEO, your senior stakeholders to understand what the value, the benefit of customer success can be difficult. So quite often you're facing an uphill struggle, as well as educating the rest of the business. I think quite often you're also trying to educate your customers. I've been in organizations that are not sure what we're trying to do. Are you sales? Are you support? Are you just trying to sell me something? So I think we as leaders have to be very bold and be happy to try different things, take ownership, be accountable. And I think what you've got to find is that we can't all do it on our own. We need help. We need help from other people within our businesses. So we need to be very collaborative and engage with other senior stakeholders internally. We need to build up those external relationships with our client stakeholders, but also, as we've said right at the beginning, work as a community here. What else are we doing? What other ideas? What have ideas people tried? What systems, what tools, what processes? There's a lot of new, very clever technology out there that can help. Looking at things like tech touch and tech-enabled touch. There's a lot of new frameworks, a lot of reporting. So there's a lot more we can do around that. I think we've also got to have a lot of questions about what resources do we have? Quite often as a CS leader, you might be one of a small team. You might have customer success managers that themselves don't have much experience. Is that enough? What does customer success mean? Does support, do the other post-sales functions form part of your business? So really push the boundary for what resources we need, what investments we need. I think other leaders taking steps to move outside of their comfort zone as well. Help your other business leaders to push that out. Sorry, Jace, you were going to say something.
No, I was definitely going to agree with you. I think, part of this too is, helping people to rethink what's possible and not being afraid to take risks, because so much of this is, you're trying to get your customers to engage with you and your product in a different way than they ever have before. You can't do that if you keep doing the same things you always did before. And if you only bring the same tools in, and finding some visionary leaders that can say, hey, here's a really different way to do this. Let's try this. Let's see if it works. Let's see how we can improve upon it. Having leaders that can take those risks and have that vision is hard, but that's part of being bold. But then also recognizing it, I think to your point with the other executives, in the organization, they've got to be supportive of that and create an environment where CS leaders are allowed to be bold and can really bring that vision.
I think that's so right. I love the art of what's possible. One of the big challenges we've got is trying to define the remit of what customer success is. What are we there to do for our customers? How do we define that and define what our organizational structures look like? I'm a big believer in customer centricity is all about breaking down organizational silos within business, and you get them irrespective of the size of the business, the age of the business. All businesses have internal silos. And I think one of the key drivers for customer success is you're there to help break down these barriers. And what can you do to do this? You're going to change the way your business thinks. So you've got to look at both the more strategic, how do we do this, but then also the tactical and operational. How do we execute? How do we do this? And I think there are lots of tactical things that businesses have done, that CS leaders have done to help break down those silos and get the businesses talking to each other. And I think it really leads on to the next great question, which what is it that makes a great customer success leader? And what do you think, Ted?
Wow, I think there's so many different things. I've been very fortunate in over the last few weeks, I've been reaching out via LinkedIn to a lot of CS leaders, and they've been very generous with their time to share their insights and ideas, and have really met some great people that are doing some really exciting things. And what really stuck out for me, though, for most of them, was they all seem to have a passion and excitement for what they did and for putting the customer first, and all had a passion for trying new things. But what also really jumped out is very few of them were deep in their technology, but instead were more about really understanding how to reach people where they are, build relationships, have empathy, and sort of help shift the organization, and try new things. And, one of the things that I've heard quite a bit, and that I think you mentioned too, is people stepping outside their comfort zone. And I think a lot of the great leaders that I've been speaking with, in their case, it's more of how to help people expand their comfort zone and to figure out how to do things new in a different way, and with that very positive take on it. I think also one of the things that we look at is with software adoption and customer success and getting people, ultimately it's about getting people to change the way they view their job and the way they perform their job. It's not about how fast you go and how fast you get to the answer. It's about how many people you bring along with you and how you build that community and align that vision. So I think the really great leaders are ones that both have a vision, but understand how to meet people where they are and bring them along with them towards that vision, and get them to collaborate effectively, while still being bold and risk-taking, which is it's really hard to do. So I think they definitely have that, and they have that service mentality where they're not pushing sales. I think the people I've met that seem most successful in their role, they all have this idea that we truly believe if we build great customer relationships and help our customers get value, then the sale and the renewal will come. And we understand that's the ultimate goal for a lot of the chief revenue officers and for our companies, is that dollar stuff. But the way we're going to get there is through delivering excellence, and that the sale will come. They have faith, they trust the process, which is a very organizational change term. But so in my mind, those are great CS leaders. And I think we could talk another time about what makes someone a poor leader. But for great leaders, I think if you have a lot of those skills, it's going to get you where you need to be. What about you?
I think I agree. And I think one other thing, and I'm a big believer in this, is you're part of your own customers. Yes, you've got your external customers, but I always look upon my team as my customers. And it's my responsibility to really help them develop. This is a very new and exciting role and field to be in. We're not quite sure what the future looks like. There's so many different career paths you can open up. But I think as a CS leader, you've got to be that empathy and passion you talk about, Jason, is so important. You've got to have it for your own team. You've got to be there as that coach and mentor to help build and guide your team to what else they can do. I think roles in CS can open up doors in professional services, project management, service delivery, leadership. There's so many different things that we're seeing doors open up in. I think it's so important. to actually work really closely with your staff. I really love empowering my team so that they can be out there at the front, trying new things, work with new things, try new things with customers. But I think that's really, really important as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think, related piece that since getting that, Jason, what's your take on the best way to continue to develop CS leaders?
I think that's such a great question. I think we've talked about a lot of the skills and ideas and traits that make a great CS leader, but it doesn't stop there. And we as CS leaders need to keep growing and developing ourselves. We're not at the end of our own journeys. And I think what there are lots of opportunities with the community, with the network. I mean, this itself, I think, is a brilliant example. Jason and Jason, how we met each other, but providing opportunities for customer success coaching, mentorship, building this community, sharing things with the community. I really do think that customer success is so different and so unique. And I say it so much, but I really do believe it. The number of events I go to, and there isn't another group of people that are as collaborative as this, and you don't get people working together, sharing ideas. We're not competing against each other. We want to share and help. And I think being part of that network and contributing, there are a growing number of customer success networks, associations, meetups. I love every day I see meetups popping up in different places around the world. There's one in Dubai soon, which I think is phenomenal. That's been going a while. We've got a number in the UK. But be part of that, really contribute. And I think it's so important to give leaders an opportunity for peer support. We all run into challenges. There'll be areas that I've run into. I know I recently had a lot of challenges around renewals processes. Speak to the community. The community is so big about helping develop ideas. And really also for where people can get to in their careers. There's a lot of mentoring and guidance you can get from people that have been doing this for longer than we have. They've been in different roles. Like I said in my intro, I think one of the great things I've got is coming in with a broad experience. But people have got more experience that I don't get. I don't have the sales side of it. So it's so nice seeing other people come in. And then I think the other thing is that you've got to keep doing, really be pivotal to breaking down those barriers. Be that person that can help use customer success to facilitate so many of those conversations internally. Break down those barriers at the senior management level, at the exec level. We are quite often the voice of the customer at the exec table. It often is a lonely place to be, but it shouldn't be, and it doesn't need to be. So start breaking down those barriers. And where there are gaps that you've got, like I said, I'm not a salesperson, but learn from the other experts, your other leaders internally. I don't understand sales, for example. I do understand it, but I'm not an expert. But bring them the same on the dev side. Any other insights from you, Jason?
No, I think there's definitely that. Also increasingly, since people are so looking for new leaders and setting up a team, there's such competition that I think a lot of people will get thrust into leadership roles in CS when they're not necessarily quite ready for it, or they haven't been set up to succeed in those roles. So if they don't have the support in their organization, making sure that they have ways outside of it, whether it's the pure support and the meetups or coaching with people who've done it before and experienced CS leaders and mentorship, I think those are so critical. But I've also been talking to a lot of organizations that, as they're hiring people, they're realizing, okay, we get them trained up and then they either leave to go into another CS role or a different part of the business. So making sure that people are starting to think through CS career paths and how to build that in to keep people for retention is going to be really, really critical.
I think that's so important. I really like the idea of, people do come into this with not much experience, and it's part of our role is to help mentor them. So a big believer that there's a lot of about giving them, as well as us helping each other, but give to the community, really help do that. That leads on to another great question, I think, Jason. Do you think there are any differences that we're seeing now in the leadership needs, the challenges between the US and the UK and elsewhere globally?
I don't think that the leadership needs there are uniquely different. And it's been great. Obviously, you and I met when I was over at the UK for a conference. I've been working over there and have clients over there and in other parts of the globe. And it seems like the customer success challenges tend to be largely the same, or at least in the same categories. But I think there is something to be said for there will be some unique challenges with a global team, especially around differences in ways of working, cultural differences in different countries. All of those things that you need to be aware of and you need to manage through those. So having, local people that can really help understand that, and regional leaders that can guide you through unique differences in different parts of the world, I think is very critical. But in terms of the leadership skills and the overall needs, I think they are largely the same. But as you and I were talking the other day, I think there's also another interesting point too, is as you look at those cultural differences and understanding how people interact, you'll see things even like differences in how you might get an NPS score. So for example, in the US, you might get 10s across the board and customers rave about you and other great things. And in more reserved cultures or in other cultures, the best you'll ever get might be a 7. And recognize if you just go off the numbers and don't understand that there is a cultural implication that a 7 in the UK or other parts of the world may be like the best you'll ever get in a very satisfied customer. If you're expecting to get a 10 there and hold people accountable for that when it may not be appropriate, you're going to be in a world of hurt pretty quickly. So that's my take on it. Do you have other thoughts on that?
James, I think that last point is so key, and that is something I've seen with the NPS. I'm in Britain. I'm a Brit. 7 out of 10 is good. That's a good score.
Yeah.
10 out of 10 very rarely happens. So I think it's something you've got to be very, very wary of. But as we as all CS professionals and CS leaders know, 7 on an NPS score isn't what we want. So you've got to be so wary of that and look at making changes to your measurements, how you interact with different customers. You may be an organization providing the same service to different customers in different countries globally. You've got to be very aware of that. I think those cultural nuances really do come into it. And as you start to scale and grow as an organization, the language and the local knowledge become more and more critical. I think what we're beginning to see now is a move away from kind of just central leadership for customer success organizations to having regional leaderships who understand what those differences are. So I'm seeing quite a few organizations in conversations I'm having recently where they've got a US leader, they might have an EMEA leader, they might have one out in Asia Pacific, but they might even then break down the EMEA one across different countries within Europe. I think we are seeing regional leaders coming out. So I think that's something that's very important as well.
Right. And I think that ties into how to make sure how to grow and scale and standardize processes and where you want to go, yet having those regional differences. Big challenge that we'll probably get to another time. But I did want to ask you then, where do you typically find great CS leaders and where do they come from, especially if you're looking to grow a team?
I think that's such a great question and something that quite often is very, very difficult. I know there are a number of organizations that have been struggling for a good few months now, looking for leaders that I've been in conversations with. I was going to say over here in Britain, you find us down in the pub quite often. But I think a lot of that it's meant in jest, but there's some sense in that because there are so many meetups. I mean, I know this week I've got at least 3 meetups in the evening. So we do tend to meet up after work. We do have lunchtime sessions. There are discussions, webinars like this. So I think you've really got to look quite wide and far. They're not where you might normally think them. I think you do get a lot of really good CS leaders coming up from non-customer success roles, even your non-customer facing roles. So be wary of that and look at, there are some fantastic salespeople out there. There are some fantastic support leaders. These guys have seen the different challenges around there. So I've seen salespeople be really, really good CSMs. I've seen sales leaders struggle to be CS leaders, but on the other side, I've seen some that don't. So you've really got to look far and wide for it. I think we do. Having said that, though, I do think sales can be one of the most challenging areas to come from. There are a lot of salespeople that still can be too focused on just the numbers. That isn't a general statement, or it might be too much of a general statement. But you've really got to think it's a lot more about that. And I'm seeing more and more salespeople now thinking about relationship, longevity of relationships. This is partnerships. So you want to see that happening. We can see that. And I have seen, as I said, I've seen some really, really solid salespeople, account managers move into senior customer success manager roles that then progress through the ranks there. I think on the support side, yes, that's a really phenomenal area to come from. But what you've got to make sure is that you're changing from that mentality of being reactive all the time to how do you be more proactive? How do we not just say yes all the time? How do we make sure we're doing the right thing? I think professional services and consultants, and there are a lot of really, really exciting consultancy firms out there. There are some that specialize in customer success, but I think they bring in a really, really solid element into customer success. I think one of the one of the things that I really believe in customer success that we do is we are managing multiple projects at the same time. That might be every customer that we deal with is an individual project wherever we're working with them, working up for an EBR, a QBR, or customer value reviews, as I've called them, or training. But they are projects, and you're really used to managing multiple things at the same time. I think you're used to also, as a professional services person, used to building relationships very quickly, managing very difficult customers and having those difficult conversations, which is a really key part of what we do. Any other points that you'd add to that, Jason?
No, I think you're definitely right. The part about having difficult conversations with customers, that's been absolutely critical. We hear all the time about customers that are, red and need to be, dealt with and have some really frank conversations. Or customers that are unsatisfied in other ways that not everyone is comfortable having those discussions. And also we've trained a lot of teams and worked with a lot of CS leaders. And one of the challenges I find is you'll get some great CS leadership, but then some of their staff members may have originally come from a support type role, and the staff members struggle to get into more proactive business outcomes as opposed to a reactive product focus discussion with their customers. And I think many times the CS leaders who have those team members, they get very frustrated and don't know quite what to do to manage their team differently. But it's definitely a challenge of finding the right people.
Absolutely. I think the other key thing is that people with the account management experience, the commercial experience, can really bring a nice commercial slant into the team, which is really cool. I think that right nicely leads into kind of one of the next questions I'd pose is what would you see kind of the first 90 days for a new CS leader coming into the role? What are the key things that you think they should be looking to do in the first 90 days, Jason?
Wow, that is a very good question. We get asked all the time about that because you've got a very short window, I think, to really prove your worth and to prove the worth of the customer success team, especially if it's an organization that has not had one before and doesn't fully understand where they need to go. But I think there are a couple of things that need to be done in the first 90 days. And one of the first ones, I think, is really looking externally at your customers to understand where are they struggling to get value and what needs to happen to help them get value with your product or service so that they will get the business outcomes they need, so that they will renew, so they will expand. And really start with that perspective of what are the customer needs and then work backwards from there to figure out how you map it into what you're actually going to do and what are your customer services and how do you want to treat your customers and be able to work with them in a way that will be effective and impactful and affordable for you and for them. But then the other big area where I see so many customer success teams struggling, and it's amazing, there are already several instances out there that we've come across where people are on their second or third attempt at customer success and have set up teams and gotten rid of the teams entirely and brought it back and all that, is they really didn't help set a vision and a path forward amongst the other executives in their own organization. And they were so focused on external customer issues or within their own team that they weren't building the bridges across their organization, bringing everyone with them. One of the things that I've consistently found effective and that we've helped clients do, and then I've heard from other CS leaders, is really building that executive vision right up front for how CS needs to evolve and the business impact it will have, not just on the CS team and the bottom line, but also on the other parts of the organization. What's the impact on sales? What's the impact on product management? What's the impact on support and training and all those marketing and finance, all those good things. Getting the other leaders in the organization to understand what's going to happen for them, but also how they need to adjust so that the customer outcomes are there, because it's not just the customer success team that's going to get there. And one of the things I think that is very effective that has not been done as widely as it could or should be is really facilitating those vision setting sessions with the other executives and then following up with them to map out what's the journey to build and get to that full maturity of customer success. What's the trajectory you need to be on to get there? What does everyone else need to do to both get everyone to understand how big of an issue this is, but as a CS leader to give you the support and the bandwidth and the runway that you need to go and take the actions that will have an impact. Because when you come in, your customer success team is not going to be up and fully effective in 90 days. It's going to take a much longer burn. You've got to get that support right up front. And then I think as part of that vision and where you need to go next is really mapping out how do you grow and scale? What are your tools? What are your processes? What are the resources that you need? And what's a realistic time frame to get there? And how to make sure that coincides with the growth of your organization. Because you need to figure out your path forward to that growth and that scaling, and make sure the other executives understand where you're going and why, the sequence in which you'll do it. So that's a heavy lift for 90 days to get started, recognizing that it is a marathon and not a sprint. But those are, I think, are some of the first pieces to get straight. So that's my take, Jason. What's your thought?
I like the way you finished that it's a marathon, not a sprint. I think quite often a lot of businesses are expecting results from a sprint. So I think we have to kind of set out that vision. This is what we look to achieve, but you're not expecting to see an ROI on a customer success leader within 90 days. You've got to really build out a bold vision and plan as to where we're going to go. And I think that's so important. And you touched on there, working with your other stakeholders internally, really understanding what their challenges are, what else you should be doing, how customer success relates back to them. I think a big thing that I talk about as well as part of those first 90 days is all about, I call it discovery. So it's I want to get out there. I want to meet all of my customers, as many as I can in those first 90 days. I want the voice of the customer from the customer, understanding what their pain points are for them, but also what things are we doing really well. I understand the vision, the direction from them, start understanding what kind of frameworks they want from us, what more we could be doing, what less they want, get their own take on what we should be doing around customer success. So it all is about a lot of conversations you need to have in those first 90 days, the first 120 days, to then build up a good roadmap for you then to set into kind of your first year role.
Right. That's so important. So when you're doing all of that and knowing that there's this marathon mentality, how should a CS leader be measured? What are the metrics that they should be measured on?
Sadly, time to finish isn't one of them, which both relates to a time for a marathon and a sprint. I think business metrics are clearly a key thing here. And I'd see these as there's a lot of organizations that look at customer success metrics as metrics just for your team. So if you look at revenue retention rate, that includes expansion, growth, and churn. You look at how we're driving value, how we're driving outcomes. You can look at customer churn as a separate number from revenue retention rate. I think it is important to split it out. So look at the number, the percentage of customers that are leaving, but also look at revenue churn. But I think it's one really important thing to do is to look at these as business objectives. Yes, they relate to what we are doing as part of a customer success function, but churn isn't necessarily just as a result of what the success team is doing. So you have to change the business mentality so these become business level objectives that can be top down. I've been in organizations where NPS is a customer success metric. That's both good and bad. I think you need somebody to own it. Not necessarily the scores, as we alluded to earlier on. The scores on their own don't tell you anything. It's the data behind them, but also the trends around it. But I think as a success leader, you can identify these really key customer metrics, the customer objectives that you should be doing, put the numbers around those. But part of what you need to be doing is making sure that they're tracked as business objectives. Your investors want to be seeing what's happening with churn, what the additional value is we're doing. So you need to be able to push them up from being just about you and just about your team up to the business level. I think quite often that is one of the biggest challenges. So what I often do when I go into new organizations is come in with kind of a starting point as to these are the typical customer metrics, and I'll even call them customer metrics as opposed to customer success metrics. And then look at what ones we've got in place. There may be some realignment we need to do with the typical quarterly, 12-monthly goals, but make sure my management team are aligned with how they're going to feed into those ones. And then with my own teams, build out some ones very specific to them. Right. Any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said there. I think the only thing I would add to it is sort of like we talked about in the first 90 days in the visionary. I recently wrote an article trying to make a distinction between what I called short-term trajectory metrics versus the long-term performance metrics. And I think in the short term, if you're a new customer success leader and you're building visions for what it takes to build your team and to mature its capability, some of your short-term metrics should be more around, did you hit your milestones for building out your team and growing and scaling your capabilities? And while you're doing that, I think you can start to gather baseline metric data around the business metrics that you talked about, and the customer metrics. But I don't think you should be held accountable for those in the short term while you're still building out your capabilities. So having those capability or trajectory metrics to show you you're on track, I think that's a great way to prove to your executives and to the organization, we have a plan, we have a vision, all the executives have bought into it, and now we're working our plan and we're on track and off track. And I think sort of related to that too, since it does require so much support and commitment from other leaders in your organization, figuring out, are there any trajectory metrics that they should be held accountable that might be new to them to show that they're supporting customer success? Are there areas that they need to tweak their internal processes or get their teams scaled up or understanding what customer success is doing that they should be held accountable? One of the questions that often comes up, we had buy-in, we thought we had buy-in, we didn't have the buy-in we thought we had. I often ask, how do you recognize buy-in? What are the specific actions that people take that demonstrate their commitment and to demonstrate they're doing the things that will be supportive? Because ultimately, you want to see someone take action to demonstrate what they're doing and the other executives. So what metrics should they be held accountable to show their support? So that's just a couple of thoughts on the short term and how to build up where you need to go.
They're great ones. I think you hit on something there that's really key. I think as a CS leader coming in, I mentioned early on about kind of the idea of a customer success project, but you should build out a 12-month program, a 12-month project as to what you want to achieve. And part of your measurement has to be, what have I achieved against that plan? Am I delivering these project milestones? So really thinking a program mentality about that. You'll have lots of different things to do. And I think that measurement has to be delivery of that project. And it has to be quite agile and quite nimble and able to change with the business. But I think you have to be able to deliver according to that, which is really important to do.
Yeah,
we've had a lot of questions, guys, that were submitted in advance. So what we're going to do is try to go through them one by one, and then there's a few that have been answered. I think there's 4 or 5 that have been asked throughout the webinar as well. Please do keep submitting more questions. But what Jason and I'll do now is run through some of the questions that we've had in advance. So one of the ones that was asked was, as a new director of customer success at a startup organization, what, in your opinion, should you focus on in the first 90 days?
And I think we answered that one pretty much, figuring out your customer needs and your vision, and then getting the other leaders to agree the vision, the steps, and those trajectory metrics of where you need to go, and clarifying the role of other departments in making CS successful for the organization is pretty key. So I think we've covered that one. So then, Jason, we're coming up on year end, and sort of curious of what items, if any, do you recommend reviewing at least once a year?
I think this was when we were talking about this before, Jason. I think this is such a great question. This, and I think we were challenged with the answer for this, because are there any that we'd only look at doing annually? And I don't think there are. I think one of the key ones that we both agree on, and that comes up in lots of the different discussions, is voice of the customer. Look at what your voice of the customer is, but that's an ongoing thing. Make sure that you're out there speaking to your customers. That is so important. I'm a big believer in bringing in the voice of my customer into all of my meetings. I like to start my exec meetings, the senior management team meetings, with customer feedback, good or bad. And I also like getting the teams out to meet the customers. And I think making sure you've got that voice of the customer there as an ongoing thing is so important. I think, as we said, one of the very first questions, are we being bold enough? So always go back and ask yourself, is there more I could be doing? Am I really pushing the boundaries of what customer success could be doing enough? Has your vision changed? Always go back to this. Customer success is continually developing. That's, I think, what makes it so exciting to be in. There is nobody that's got it 100% perfect yet. We're all learning off each other. But does your vision change around that? Also look at your own metrics. What metrics have you got? Do they need to change? You've got your core ones. We've talked about revenue retention rate, churn, NPS, but are there other ones that you need to build into it? And I think another one that's good to look at least 6 monthly, is around the account ratio that you've got. So for your CSMs, have you actually put in place logic yet that says for your different tiers what you think a good number of accounts or customers per CSM is? And are we delivering the right value with the customers? And how you review that. So that, again, might change on time. I think, Jason, what do you think about this next one here? So as a leader who's got global responsibilities, how would you advise or provide any advice around account customer segmentation for global customers, for global accounts, so to really drive efficiency and avoid any confusion for customers?
Yeah, I think that's a big challenge that we see more and more, and that's a tough one to crack without getting into the details. Because one of the things that we've spoken to when we chat with the leaders of large organizations, they've got different regions and cultures and time zones, but they also have numerous product lines many times. If they're that global, many times they have different product lines and different user bases. And I think the big thing is that it comes down to is it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and that you do need to figure out what are the best ways to segment and where do you need to go around that. And really, I think that comes back to your point of the voice of the customer and understanding their needs and working backwards from there. So there may be things that would be more operationally efficient for you, but if it's not going to meet the customer's needs, it's probably not the best idea. And increasingly, we're seeing a lot of regional CSMs where we're working with a couple organizations right now. They have global teams and trying to figure out where we have standardized processes and playbooks that really talk about the intent and the desired outcome and some of the core skills that we need, and some standard processes to follow, but also making sure there's room for them to deviate for cultural nuances or local requirements around that. And it's not a one-size-fits-all. So really more of a framework approach as opposed to a strict mandated policy. And that can be tough too with automations, especially as people are looking at low touch and medium touch of how do we automate some things but not others, needs to be there. But I think when you look at those, as you have that kind of a global thing, there's so many parameters you need to consider that you need to go through and really look at all the important things. But then similarly, and I think this comes back to the question before it, try some things, experiment, take some risks and be bold, figure out what works, and then come back and learn from it to figure out what you need to change and tweak up. And making sure that as you're doing this, you're setting the expectation with customers that this is an evolving practice to continue to meet their evolving needs. So it's going to shift time and time again. So that's my take. I think, Jason, a question for you. If a CS team is not directly responsible for renewal quotas, like an account manager might be, what other metrics and KPIs could be used to measure the success of the individual CSMs and the organization?
It's a great question. I think we've kind of talked through kind of some of the metrics, and I talked around kind of churn. I think is an important one. So not looking at revenue with churn, but look at customer churn. I think expansion, which I see very differently to renewal, it's just not about a customer renewing, it's about how that account grows. And I think that really is important. So look at the dollar, the pound size, or the euro size of how that account grows over time. What other services you're selling. But I think one really important thing, and there's a conversation that I did with another CS leader at Pulse recently, was around usage and adoption of the product. How do you measure that? And it isn't just log-ons, it isn't just people interacting with the product. How do you know you're driving value through the product? Do you know what the outcomes your customers are expecting are? So I think it's a really key thing at the point of the sale is for your sales guys to capture what the customer's expectations are, what the required outcomes, their so-called desired outcomes are. But how do you track those? And I think that then feeds back into adoption and usage. You want to show the customer an ROI against those. You want to be able to say to a customer, come, your account manager, if they do the renewals, to be able to say, look, we've driven this much value. So I think you've got to know what their expected outcomes are and be able to report and show against those. And look at usage. I've used the concept of transactions in a number of different organizations, and that could be something that as a business sell. You might do a pay-as-you-go model where what you sell are financial transactions, be it a sale, but it could be a certain journey through your product. So look at your journey and adoption like that. But I think the adoption piece is also something that's so critical, and it's so difficult to get right. A lot of what you do, Jason, is around this very piece. But how do you measure that adoption? Once you've done the implementation and go live, what are the key things that you should be looking for there? And there are a whole different set of metrics, and I think there's a whole nother discussion that we can have around that. But making sure that initial adoption and go live is what the customers expect. And I think a lot of it comes down to asking the right questions, making sure that you're getting the right feedback from your customers.
Absolutely.
I think one of the other really good questions here, and I'm going to throw this one to you, Jason. We are coming up fast on time, guys. We'll try and get through as many of these as we can. For any that we don't get through, we will feedback afterwards in a follow-up. One of the other questions that someone posed at the beginning was, do you believe that customer success managers should own a revenue quota for upsell, cross-sell, or renewals, or should this stay within the sales or account management function? And it's a great question, and I've seen different organizations with different approaches. I don't know what you think, Jason.
Yeah, I also have seen different organizations do different approaches, and I've seen where it evolves over time from the startup that maybe they have such a small team that everyone does a bit of everything to a global piece where they go down and specialize later to customer success, operations, CSM relations, account management, all those great things. I think either can be successful depending where you are, but for me, the underlying thing is you've got to be able to put your CSMs in a position where they can really build and develop a trusted relationship with a client, where the client views them as a business partner who's not trying to push something on them or hit a quota or do things that may not be in the client's best interest. Because as soon as the client stops to perceive that you're working in their best interest and you're working in your own, that's when you're in for a world of hurt, in my mind. I think the other piece that I've heard too is really, and this was not my line, but I really took it on board and appreciate it, is it's really the job of the CSM to go through and create the desire for the customer to renew. So it may very well be that the CSM is talking about their business needs and outcomes and helping them identify other areas they could get even more value and stop some of the value leaks that they might have. And they can talk about different ways to do that, but it could then be up to an account manager or sales or someone else to go through and actually do the paperwork or negotiate the deal and the legal piece and all of that stuff. So in situations like that, I think the more that you can keep the CSM focused on business outcomes and customer engagement and trusted relationships, the better off you'll be. Though, as a caveat, I think there are areas where it does behoove the organization and the CSM in general. Maybe they have aggregate goals or a portion of their success measures internally are based on how well did the team do this quarter, the customer success team as a whole, maybe not an individual quota, but a team approach and what that needs to look like. So I think however you try to do it, the big thing though is making sure that relationship with the customer stays intact. That's my take. Jason, do you have other thoughts?
I think that last point, Jason, is so critical. I've worked with organizations that have done two approaches. I know lots of really experienced CS leaders that believe in one versus the other. I think it really does depend on your organization. It depends on your resourcing. There are some businesses that don't have account management. For them, sales is about new biz and customer success owns the renewal, it owns the upsell. I've worked in an organization recently where, and I mentioned earlier, we specifically employed someone who was an account manager in a previous life, but wanted to move into customer success. And what that gave us was a very commercial insight and somebody as a point of reference for the team to help the rest of the team grow. We also worked really close with our sales teams to build up negotiation skills, because quite often that commercial negotiation is missing. So I've seen it be very, very successful on both sides. So I don't think there is a wrong or a right here. I think you've got to look at what your organization is. Your point, Jason, about where the revenue metrics are, where the numbers sit, I think is key. I think we are going to see customer success becoming more and more commercial and owning more of it, but it really depends on the level of maturity in the business and what kind of resources you've got.
Yep, agreed. So I think this is going to have to be our last question in the interest of time. We do have a few that we did not get to today, which we will reach out and either respond back for those or we'll address them in a future webinar topic. So I guess, Jason, the final question then would be anything for new CS leaders, any suggestions there?
I think hopefully there's a lot of stuff that we've already covered here, but I think one of the really good things is if, reach out to the community, find someone who's in a different role, who's a CEO maybe, a CTO, someone who's in a very different part of the business, get a mentor, an external mentor or coach, but reach out to the community, reach out to join the community on, LinkedIn. There are meetups, there are lots of events on Eventbrite. Get yourself out there. And I think it's really, we want the whole leadership. Everybody brings something different and something unique. I don't think there is one person that knows everything about this. There's something that is learning all the time. So I think really be prepared to share and share perhaps more than you've done before. It's about giving back. And I think there's a lot for everyone to learn. Somebody has asked one of the questions in the chat window about the recommendations for CS resources and meetups. Look on the Meetup app, things like Eventbrite. There are a lot of event services there. There's the Customer Success Network, the Customer Success Association. I'd really recommend joining any of those. link up with a lot of people on LinkedIn. You know, there are a lot of other leaders, and try and build up those external relationships. It's great. You know, Jason said we both met at a conference. I think it was the early part of this year. It was a chief customer officer conference or a customer success conference. But put yourself out there. You know, there are lots of them out there in different places. So I think a lot of it is look for that external help. Don't be afraid to ask. Be bold. Push the boundaries of what we're delivering.
Yep, I agree, and thank you so much. So just a couple of closing thoughts. Coming up on December 18th, we'll have the next episode of Jason's Take On, and this is when we will be discussing what it means to be customer-centric. So if you've enjoyed our conversation today, we invite you to come back. We're going to be putting up a dedicated registration page for that December 18th webinar, as well as the replay will be made available there for folks. And as we continue to build out the series, the future replays will be there. Also, if you've enjoyed this, we encourage you and request that you share it with others and let people know that they should check it out. And so please share the news. Just a couple of quick things. Jason, do you want to talk a little bit about your contact details and how you can help?
Guys, as I said, I'm working currently with a number of organizations helping with customer success. So please feel free, anybody, if there's any follow-up questions you've got, any points you'd like to discuss, for any mentoring, consulting or coaching, reach out to me, email, Twitter. Feel free to give me a phone call. Or LinkedIn. You know, I'd love to grow my own network and speak to lots of you guys and understand more about what you do. But as Jason said, thank you so much for listening. We really enjoyed this conversation. You know, it's been great, Jess and I, listening to each other, listening to the questions. And I hope you guys have got a lot out of it.
Great, thank you. And obviously, my contact information is here as well too. You can always reach us at info@tritons.com. We do training, consulting, and coaching, so always out there. And please invite everyone to connect with me on LinkedIn directly. I've had some really great conversations there, and always love meeting new folks interested in the field of customer success and to learn what others are doing. And if you do find yourself in the need of coaching or training or consulting from Tritons, we have a variety of online and in-person training offerings as well as consulting. Really excited about those. And we do specialize in both customer success and software adoption. So if any of your customers are struggling internally to get the adoption and usage and value they want, we have programs aimed specifically at them, and I'm always happy to talk with them. So with that said, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, and we look forward to you joining us on the next one for what it means to be customer-centric. Thanks so much.